Hey, I'm Sooper. Welcome to the Monkey Farm. I saw the latest trailer for the Snyder Cut of Justice League, and it got me thinking three things. One, dear God, this trailer is boring the crap out of me. Two, does Zack Snyder know any songs besides Hallelujah? Song's great, but I feel like you only really get to use that once in your own catalog of films, and he used that up in Watchmen. Three is the topic for today's video, director's cuts or extended editions. But I have been informed that this video is way too long and rambling, so I've put together a studio-approved cut of the video first, so here that is. I think Terminator II was the first director's cut that I remember hearing about, Ridley Scott's Alien. There's also an extended cut of Aliens, directed by, again, James Cameron. 1989's The Abyss, Blade Runner, Little Shop of Horrors, RoboCop, Highlander 1 and 2, Dawn of the Dead, Almost Famous, Superman 2, Daredevil, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. Director's cuts are tricky. And for those of you who want actual content, here is the full extended director's cut of the video. I think Terminator II was the first director's cut that I remember hearing about, and almost certainly was the first one I owned a copy of. I owned a copy on VHS back in the 90s, and it's definitely an enhancement to the film. Nothing in it is necessary, but I do mostly prefer it for the character bits, like Sarah's dream where Kyle appears and warns her that she needs to protect their son, and a few extensions to scenes that close up minor plot holes. That Kyle scene doesn't really need to be there, but it's still a cool extra, and it's nice to have a version where it's cut back into the story. I personally like the first Terminator movie more, which I know a lot of people don't, and they almost always point to the better effects, but Terminator 2 has some bits of very clunky dialogue and a lot less suspense. The original film keeps you wondering for a while the first time you see it. You don't really know who the bad guy is, or if there even is a good guy. Terminator 2 also goes back on how time travel works from the first movie, which has always really annoyed me, but that's a rant for another video about time travel movies. Anyway, Terminator 2 is a good movie, but it's also the beginning of where James Cameron became less interested in story and more interested in special effects being an end to themselves instead of means to tell the story. Which led us to Avatar, a movie that has a lot of complicated visuals and the most boring-ass story and characters I can imagine. I hate Avatar. I hate it so much. It has Sigourney Weaver in it, and I can't tell you her character's name or any interesting thing about her without looking it up. Wasting Sigourney Weaver should be a crime. Though that does give me a nice bridge to another director's cut, Ridley Scott's Alien, which also stars Sigourney Weaver, but this time it's a good movie. I'm not sure I'd consider the director's cut of Alien an improvement, but apparently neither does Ridley Scott. He added a few cut scenes back in and then shortened other sequences to give the film a quicker pace, but I think it loses something in the process. The slow building atmosphere and the growing feeling of isolation is part of what makes Alien a brilliant film. Probably one of the best sci-fi horror films ever made. And it's important to note here that the studio asked Scott to do a director's cut, so it wasn't like he felt the movie needed any changes. He just figured if they're going to mess with it, I might as well be the one to do it. There's also an extended cut of Aliens, directed by, again, James Cameron, and it is better than the theatrical for sure. The studio had cut about 15 minutes of it for time, and all of those cuts are either nice character building moments or extra action scenes. And it has a few extra scenes of Bill Paxton, which I'll always be in favor of. More Bill Paxton in everything. This is one where Cameron and Weaver both prefer the extended cut, and they're right. As with Terminator 2, the theatrical release is still good, but this other cut is always going to be my preference to watch if I have an option. Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection both have extended cuts, but I don't really particularly like those films in general in either cut, so I'm just going to skip them. Alien and Aliens have been and remain the best parts of the series, and they're both nearly flawless. The last Cameron film I will be discussing here is 1989's The Abyss and its director's cut that was released in 1993. This is probably the Cameron movie that most benefits from the new footage. A lot of it is, again, small character building, which gives you more incentive to care what happens to these people. But the big change that really elevates the director's cut from the theatrical is the ending. One of the main character plots in the movie in both versions is between a married couple, Bud and Lindsay, who are in the process of getting a divorce. They fight a lot. They still clearly need some counseling, but they clearly care about each other. So at the end, when Bud has an encounter with the underwater aliens while on a deep diving mission, that he goes into assured that this will kill him but save the lives of others. In the theatrical cut, the aliens find him. They show him that they have monitored his communications with his wife, demonstrating his love for her, and then they just return him to the surface. The end, and we were all left thinking,
and what? That's it?
So the director's cut returns a larger subplot where the world is poised on the edge of World War III. So when Bud meets the aliens at the end, the stakes are not just his life, it's everyone's lives. The aliens show him the strife all over the world and are like, maybe this planet would be better off without humanity, and honestly, same water aliens. What ends up saving the world is those messages between him and Lindsay showing that man is capable of better things than war and death. Is this extended ending a little overly on the nose and a simplistic Deus Ex Machina where true love saves the planet? Yeah, a little. But at least this ending had some actual stakes beyond Bud's life. And as simple as it is, a little more love in the world certainly can't hurt. Because you've gotten to know the characters and what's on the line is so huge, it makes that ending much more satisfying and less rushed. It brings the movie to nearly 3 hours, but I don't mind at all a movie being long if it gives me characters and a story that I care about. Cameron got praise for the visuals in The Abyss, and the director's cut release got much more positive responses. And I think that's why Avatar is extra disappointing. It was like Cameron learned a lot of lessons from The Abyss, but they were the wrong lessons. He learned that making a movie longer and adding more effects was successful, but it was successful because of the story and the characters. The effects service to the story. Avatar is the polar opposite of that. The story and characters are there to justify the effects, and they have no more depth than that. So it's just frustrating because Aliens and The Abyss show that he's capable of using effects to enhance a good story, and the effects technology for Avatar is very top level, but he isn't going, I have a great story, I need to tell it with these effects, it won't work without these effects. Instead, it's like, look what I can do with effects. That's great, but is there a plot? Not really, but look at the 3D. Also, don't you want to have sex with these cat people? That's a thing that he really asked crew members on the set, whether they were sexually attracted to giant blue cat people. He also did some amount of fat shaming of Kate Winslet on the set of Titanic. So I guess all I'm saying is James Cameron before 1995 made some really good movies that I love, and James Cameron after about 1995 can eat my entire ass. Anyway, the Abyss director's cut is one of the better ones that exists. Now I swear this entire video is not about James Cameron and Ridley Scott. In fact, after this next one, I'm done with them both, but they've both done multiple films that got meddled with by those snooping kids, I mean studio producers. One of the better examples of this for Scott is Blade Runner. There are several cuts of Blade Runner, but I'm just going to focus on the theatrical versus the director-approved version, which is called the Final Cut. Seriously, you can buy a box set with 5 different versions of Blade Runner, and most of them are not good. The Final Cut is what Ridley Scott intended to make before the studio decided the movie was too ambiguous and made Harrison Ford record voiceover narration to spell everything out. He sounds annoyed and bored the entire time. They also added on a happier ending, and I just wish people would realize that not every movie needs a happy ending. If you're going to watch Blade Runner, look for the Final Cut because it's really the only one worth seeing. Shifting gears a little, a few years back, they finally released a director's cut of the classic 80s Frank Oz musical, Little Shop of Horrors. The original ending they had shot was adapted from the stage production and used a considerable amount of the film's budget on some pretty great model and puppetry work. The original finale has Audrey and Seymour killed by the giant plant, and then a series of scenes in which seedlings from Audrey 2 are sold in mass quantities all over the country. They grow to enormous sizes, kill everyone, and take over the planet. It's very Godzilla-inspired. It has giant models of the plants towering over and smashing buildings, and in the final shot, growing all over the Statue of Liberty. It really drives home a politically tinged theme of consumerism destroying us all. But test audiences hated the ending. So the studio had Frank Oz go back and reshoot a happier ending. The audiences had really grown to like Audrey and Seymour, and they wanted them to win. Honestly, I'm very on the fence on which is better because I love the theatrical ending, but I also kind of love the dark plants fall, everyone dies ending too. And I like what they were going for, and it's pretty epic. And it's full of giant plants Kool-Aid manning through walls, so what's not to love? They're very different endings, but I love that they both exist. I've discussed RoboCop previously on this channel, but I didn't really get into the director's cut in that video. It isn't significantly different from the theatrical, aside from a few extended shots that are quite a bit more bloody. And this version was initially rated X by the MPAA before NC-17 existed. And as with a lot of things, the MPAA was wrong. The over-the-top violence in RoboCop is an inherent part of the satire, and it just works so much better in the director's cut. It's not a huge difference, but it's better, and I'm glad that I have a copy of it. Highlander 1 and 2 both have director's cuts with very different results. Highlander isn't much changed. It has a couple of added character bits, but it's pretty much the same movie. Highlander 2, on the other hand, was an attempt to fix a completely botched sequel by removing some of the more nonsensical additions, like the Immortals being aliens from another planet. But even with all of that taken out, you just can't polish a turd this massive. We are all better off pretending that Highlander was a single movie with no sequels. The original 1978 George Romero Dawn of the Dead has a ton of various recuts from different international markets, most of which removed some of the gorier shots. Some of them have added scenes, but George Romero always stated that the original theatrical cut was his preferred version, and I think that's the best way to view it. Almost Famous had an alternate director's cut by Cameron Crowe that adds a lot of stuff he'd cut for time. I think it's a better but longer film. There's one sequence that can be viewed as an extra that I wish were in the director's cut, but it involves playing Stairway to Heaven in its entirety. The scene doesn't work without playing the entire song, and Led Zeppelin wouldn't approve its use, so they didn't do it. Superman 2 is infamous for the producers having hired Richard Donner to direct Superman and Superman 2 back-to-back. Then they fired him when Superman was done and Part 2 was nearly completed and replaced him with Richard Lester. Then they had Lester rewrite and reshoot most of the sequel so he'd get the directing credit, and all of this led to a lot of strife on the set between Lester and the actors. Gene Hackman flat out refused to return to the set out of loyalty for Donner. The result is a movie that I grew up liking a lot as a kid, but it's definitely not up to the standards set by the original. And that's not even a slam on Lester as a director or as a person. He made the Beatles film A Hard Day's Night, which is one of my favorite movies where musicians play themselves. But his style just doesn't really fit Superman. There's too many overly silly comedic moments that just don't really work. And they would work for other types of superhero movies, but it's a stark mismatch with the tone for this entire series. So 26 years later, very belatedly, in 2006, Superman 2, the Donner cut, was released, which restored most of what Donner had originally shot and written. It's not a perfect version. There's a scene with Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder that was vital for the story that had never been shot. So all they had to try to make it work were scenes they'd recorded during screen tests. And, you know, the actor's hair is different between shots, and it's just sort of clearly was not intended to be in a movie. Still, it's overall the best version of the movie as a whole that exists. Daredevil has a director's cut that adds back in a whole subplot with Matt Murdock trying to help a client of his, played by Coolio, in court. And it's mostly an improvement, though it also, for some reason, takes the worst scene in the movie, in which Matt and Elektra fight each other in a children's playground while flirting, and makes it a longer scene. It was really surprising when I saw it, because I would have figured the logical and competent thing to do would have been to shorten that scene, or better yet, find a way to remove it entirely. I cringe thinking about that entire scene. It's so bad. But the director loved it, so he made it much longer, and why? Lord of the Rings has extended cuts of all three movies, which are nice for giant nerds like me, but they do make the series hours longer. It adds in a lot of stuff they'd cut from the book. If I'm gonna spend an entire day watching them, I'm much more likely to watch the extended cuts. It's not a different series, but it's just more filled out with character stuff. Sometimes, though, it's best to just leave it alone. Star Wars is a good example of that. In the late 90s, George Lucas decided to go back and clean up some effect shots for a theatrical re-release, partly to promote the upcoming release of The Phantom Menace. And if he'd just stuck to cleaning up and enhancing effects, that would have been great. Unfortunately for us all, he decided, since I'm modifying things anyway, let's just go in and add some stuff I deleted from the theatrical runs and alter a few things for shits and giggles. The effect shot updates work fine mostly, but the added scenes and bits of dialogue, such as Luke yelling in fear as he drops from a platform at the end of Empire Strikes Back, are almost universally terrible and add nothing of value. But then neither did The Phantom Menace. The most tragic thing about these special editions is that they did all of this on the original negatives, so a version that doesn't have all of these additional scenes but does have the cleaned up effects is probably impossible for them to create at this point. Director's cuts are tricky. In most cases, it's an attempt to repair damage to a story that is the result of studio meddling, and we get a better product. Sometimes it's just a fun exercise in, here's a version with everything we could find all mashed back in, whether it works or not. And those can be a nice diversion if you've seen the theatrical a dozen times and just want to look at what might have been. But sometimes the director just can't stop themselves because the technology becomes too tempting and they've gotten big enough that nobody will tell them no. So there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to these alternate extended cuts, but if you're a director, I plead with you to not surround yourself with people who won't call you out when you have a bad idea. Everyone has bad ideas or makes bad decisions. I saw Highlander 2 in a movie theater. So this video is over. Like and subscribe if you want more of this. Comment below if you have a topic you'd like to see me talk about. Thanks for coming to my meltdown.